Hello and good morning, everybody.
Hi, this is Mark Harris. I'm supposed to have an interview with Arrow today at 8 o'clock.
Oh, it's 8 o'clock your time, huh? Wow, I've already lived that 8 o'clock hour.
Well,
Man, I'm so fascinated with your book because I grew up reading short stories, and it's like this is a return to that moment where it's like you get a whole lot without having to read a lot.
it's a good form, yes, definitely.
What is that discipline like for you? Because, you know, there's so many times we just sit there and write, and it's like, oh, now I got to cut it back.
Well, short stories sort of fit into my schedule of what I could write because I'm also a filmmaker and doing other things.
Yes.
So in between films, short story was just about the biggest bite I could accomplish.
Wow. Tapping into that creative energy like that, you know, to go from making films and to be the author of short stories, is it two completely different personalities, or is it the writer who becomes the director or the creator of films?
I started out as a writer, as a newspaper reporter, and I've always written. So it's the same person, but when you're writing fiction and short stories, you're writing mainly with words. When you're making movies, you're thinking of images.
Yes.
But it's the same creator behind both.
You know, for the longest time here in the Carolinas, we would have the Novella Festival, which was all about short stories. And it was about you could only do so many words. And do they even teach this anymore? And are you opening up the door again for teachers to say, let's get back to short stories?
Well, I think short stories sort of work, given our present schedules.
Yes.
The short form is coming back both in film and in literature. It's partly because we're used to seeing things on our iPad and our iPhones in short forms, or also look at TikTok.
Yep.
Look at YouTube. People digest things in smaller forms. It fits in with our busy schedules, I think.
One of the things that you aren't afraid of to talk about inside your book called Misfits is the autism and the foster care and so many other subjects that people go, oh, I don't want to talk about that, but yet you bring it forward.
Well, both the foster care and autism, those stories grew out of film projects.
Oh.
I worked for 5 years building a website, www.interactingwithautism.com. And so I spent a lot of time researching and living in that world. But I didn't feel like I'd really finally exhausted it. So I decided there was still more I wanted to say about it, and that's why I ended up writing a short story about it. And the same is true of foster care. I made a film that I spent several years on called Foster, which was on HBO, and it followed 5 people who were part of the Los Angeles foster care system, which is the largest county foster care system in this country. And yet when I was finished, there was still more that I wanted to say. A film can only be 2 hours. And even on the video site for autism, we did 32 videos, short videos of different aspects of autism, especially focusing on the best evidence-based treatments. But when you're steeped in a subject like that, and both, there's so much more to say than you can possibly do in one film or even in several short videos.
The name of the book that we're talking about today is called Misfits. Isn't one of the most famous misfits of all time from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer?
That's true. Definitely. And he becomes a hero. The people of my book are misfits. They find sources of resilience and strength, but I don't think any of them would identify themselves as Rudolph reindeer.
You know what? You bring up a very interesting point there when you talk about the strength, because when I was in martial arts, my first years there, I would sit there and look around the room going, there is something very misfit about each and every one of us. And we would train so hard together to create that strength as a family.
Well, I think that's what a lot of the people in my short stories are looking for, some kind of connection, some kind of rootedness. I was thinking the other day that several of the stories that I've written all take place in L.A., and they take place in this sort of liminal space. I mean, it's usually encounters between people in an airport, in a parking garage, where they meet at the site of an auto accident, and all these people are sort of they don't have roots. They can't find any solid connections. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a sense of family. Certainly the story about autism, it's a father who is coming to terms with the fact that his son is not the child that he expected, and trying to make a connection with that child.
See, in each one of these stories, we see ourselves. I mean, it's just one of those things where you've made that connection. Julia Cameron would tell you that you've learned the fine art of painting the walls. In other words, you bring us into that story, and we feel like we're a part of that story.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
When is your writing discipline? In other words, do you have a writing time? Because mine is in the morning. Sometimes writers will tell me it's between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.
Well, mornings are my best time, too. It's the time when I think I'm the freshest. So I start out in the morning, and if I can spend several hours in the morning, and I find that I can be productive. And then later, so in the evenings, I often return to what I wrote during the day, and sometimes I discover that what I've written is good, and sometimes I throw it all away.
So you're like me then. You've got that perfectionist side then.
Yeah, you have to. In the short story, everything counts. Yeah, I've learned that sort of every sentence counts, and but the fact that they are short allows me the time to be able to try to perfect it, because you want it to have the kind of impact that you hope the story deserves. So I spend a lot of time rewriting. Yeah.
One of the things that I had a childhood moment while reading the book, in the way that I remember short stories because of the Reader's Digest, and I had one of those flashbacks. It's like, oh my God, this is just like when I was a kid.
Well, that's great. I mean, I also knew my family got the Reader's Digest, and there used to be a lot more magazines like the Reader's Digest where you could read stories. Unfortunately, that market has shrunk over the years. But I do think, as you were saying before, that there is an appetite for short stories. The other thing for me, the difference between fiction and films, is that writing fiction allows me the opportunity to get inside my character's head. In film, it's we understand what our characters are feeling through what they say and what they do. But in fiction, it's much easier to enter their minds. Yeah. Consciousness.
What I always like about writing is that the budget is nothing when it comes to writing. I mean, you can sit there and put yourself in any city, any country, and you can have any actor playing around in your head, and it didn't cost you a cent.
That's true. And as a filmmaker, there's a great difference. You spend a lot of time, even as a documentary filmmaker, trying to raise money to make your films. You can just go to the computer and write a story. There is a difference sometimes in the final, how many people you reach.
Yeah.
The films that I've done, and when you go, you put a film on HBO, you reach at least 1 million viewers.
Yep.
Short stories do not have that same reach. But on the other hand, to make a film for HBO that reaches 1 million people, it costs a lot of money.
You know what? You bring up a big thing here that when it comes to short stories and who are the readers, it reminds me of when I was on the Barnes & Noble tour with other writers. What would happen is they would come up and say, well, I'm a short story writer. And I would invite them to go sit in that row where the short stories were and see how many people would come in to buy one of those books. It's an exercise of truth.
And what were the results?
Well, the results were they became sharper and keener to their writing abilities. In other words, they weren't just putting a bunch of words on a page saying, "Oh, that's my short story." They started becoming smarter with their writing.
Well, it's definitely a discipline, and there are short story writers, people like Chekhov, and Raymond Carver is certainly another model for me, whose stories do live and people still read. Someone was saying, well, how many books have you sold? I said, no, not enough books compared to my films.
Yeah.
If a film only has 5,000 viewers, it's a failure. If a book has 5,000 or 10,000 readers, it's a success.
Yep.
But when you spend a couple of $1 million to make a film, you have to reach a lot more people.
Yep. Are you going to turn any of these short stories into some features on Netflix or Hulu?
One of the stories, the title story of the book, Misfits, has been optioned
Nice.
and to be turned into a movie. We'll see.
I love it. I love it. Where can people go to find out more about you, Mark? Because I want them to know who you are and what you have brought in the form of entertainment to the world.
You can go to my website, www.markjharris.com, markjharriswrites.com. You can get the book at Barnes & Noble or on Amazon. And I guess you can Google me. There's lots of articles about me and about my films.
I love it. Please come back to the show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
Okay, thanks. You too.
Thank you.